Well, hello, you watching this. I am Crusty Old Crow, and this is the first official episode of Spinning Compass. And thank you for tuning in and checking it out. For those of you who are checking this out, unaware that I was doing this, I did put a video out the other day, warning off that I was branching out my show. I do stuff about G.I. Joe, being a fan, and being a veteran. I do that tactical perspective stuff. And I want to be doing a show about ADHD, which is the Spinning Compass. And it's kind of my story about and what it was like as an adult to get diagnosed at like 45, 46 years old of having severe ADHD, and looking back at where my obstacles were. This video series I have no idea how many episodes it'll be, but I'll try to keep each of them under a half hour. But I'm breaking them down into the chapters of my career in a linear fashion. And I will go back to childhood points and whatnot, but why are we doing this video? It's to be helpful. There's no point in going through all of the stuff that I went through with an undiagnosed, I'll call it an affliction. I don't want to call it a disability, but an affliction that prevented me from learning at the rate of my peers and prevented me from a lot of things across a spectrum of topics. It just stood in my way and I didn't even know about it. Neither did the people around me. So this isn't a blame people in your past video. This isn't a tear down a foundation of the military video. And this isn't a woe is me video. This is a, hey, if you ever thought you had ADHD, then I'm here to just kind of help guide you through some things that I've learned that maybe you could be benefited from, especially as an adult, as a father, as a soldier or a veteran, or just somebody who's trying to learn different perspectives on this subject that's really come into light in recent years in the education system and in childhood development and social psychological studies, right? So to recap the two types of ADHD, right? You have your hyperactive ADHD, and you have your inattentive ADHD, for lack of better terms. I have slides on another one. I'll bring them back in a later episode. And then you have those that are right in between, which are a combined sense, which is me. And diagnosed in the 80s, I recapped that in the episode. Raised by a single mom and grandparents, lower to middle income. Education system had no idea what was going on. They thought I was the class clown, overactive, hyperactive child. Completely went under the radar, and before I knew it, I was just a problematic student throughout school. And if you think back to any of you guys who went to, clearly I think most of us all went to school of some form. If you think back to it, you probably knew a guy a lot like me that was constantly in trouble, doing things to get a reaction out of people, all that kind of stuff, right? And very little performance in studies and grade evaluations, right? Because that focus wasn't there, and we couldn't understand why it was being blamed on hyperactivity. You could go through the whole youth stuff, and that would probably take us that whole half hour, but I want to keep this tied to that military career, because that's where I think I could have used a lot of help, and knowing this before I had joined the military. I told you guys in the Worn Off episode about Spinning Compass that the military was probably the only option I had left because of an education deficiency and my ability to focus on my education or perform well under pressure in those areas precluded me from a lot of post-secondary education options like university. And while I did go to college, those problems persisted and they started to take a financial toll more than anything, so I stopped, right? I did recap that I am very much a nerd, guys. Hence the photo. I'm riding the Americans. Crusty Old Crow is my nickname. I gave it to myself. That's fair on YouTube, isn't it? So yeah, I just want to send a shout out. I know most of my demographic is US, and probably that is what a lot of it's going to remain for a while. And I just want to let you guys know that I am a Canadian. So when I talk about currency and things like that, or politics, or the military, I am talking about the Canadian military, but I have the utmost respect for you guys, and I've worked with you guys. I have a lot of American friends. I was recently in California and had best of times. I even hung out on Crenshaw for several days, and I had a blast actually. So nerds, yes, yeah, I was one of them. We all remember nerds wasn't always associated with Marvel movies and making great sci-fi. There was a time where you didn't want to be associated with it, and they were the closet individuals that had interests outside the popular norm, right? For lack of general statement, maybe these guys went hard into their studies, more so than they did their wardrobes. Maybe they were more concerned about Dungeons and Dragons and fan fiction than they were about girlfriends and social situations. All these types of things. And if you look at any nerd group, eventually you will find someone that has either a mental affliction or something along the lines of an ADHD, an ADD, attention deficit disorder, obsessive compulsive disorders, any kind of real disorder that maybe wasn't going diagnosed at that time, but could be strongly suspected. And the way that these people kind of couldn't fit in despite whether they tried or not, right? And I think it was every kid in my generation's fear, quietly, or at least that's how I saw it, that if you went out on a limb and said you liked a certain thing that other people didn't like, the social scrutiny would also sometimes turn you into a nerd. But now nerds are kind of running it, aren't they? We're kind of running the show. We create your toys. We create your comic books. We create your TV shows. We create your music. We create your movies. And where's the bullies now? So, Revenge of the Nerds, way ahead of its time. But I digress. My point is that with ADHD at that time, I was very socially fearful of what I couldn't understand. That's me with the sunglasses, sitting beside that cool dude smoking a cigarette, my good buddy, right? I was doing a lot of stuff to fit in because academically and socially in school, I couldn't, right? So I was very much a crowd pleaser. I was an entertainer. I was the guy that fit in with everybody as best as he could. And honestly, if you were to compare it to anything back in the day, just an example, I was big into the Clash and the Sex Pistols, the Exploited Dead Kennedys, all that other stuff. Making myself different from the nerd, I was into the punk craze and the mod craze and things like that for a while in my high school years. Those were the people I found were accepting of me, and those were the people that I found the most in common ground with. But I was able to mix with the other cliques of the group. And just a shout out, in college, I did dress up as the Crow. Little did I know I would come back to that name as the crusty old Crow, but it has crossed my mind now. Again, always a nerd, always into this stuff, so comics and Joe, right? And I've talked 99 other episodes about Joe, so I'm minimizing it here, but you see it is reflected. That's how I got onto YouTube. This statement was always a big one for me. Being a comic collector, this really kind of formed that real firm bond with, I wanted to be a writer with Marvel. It kind of confirmed that for me when I saw that clearly someone with ADHD was working at Marvel Comics, and they were writing a title called X Factor at the time. I never verified if that was a fact, but just this script, we are looking at a guy named Pietro, aka Quicksilver. He is the brother of Scarlet Witch. If you watch the Disney series, and you know that he is a speedster, he moves at hypersonic speed at all times. In the comics, you find out that that's very problematic for him because his world is continually on the go, very much like it was with me with a hyperactive, dominant ADHD that was going undiagnosed. My whole world was on the go at all times. I said in my last video, I was enjoying life way more than everybody else. Everybody else was stressing. I was enjoying life. But, enjoying life meant being told you were a handful, that you were uncontrollable, that you had disciplinary issues, that your parents were going to find out what happened at school today, all of that stuff. When we got to know Pietro from this page, it really gravitated. So he's talking to his psychologist. He's on a team called X Factor, and they're dealing with his anger issues. And what does he say? He says, "Tell me, doctor, have you ever stood in a line at a bank machine behind a person who doesn't know how to use it? Or wanted to buy stamps at the post office, and the fellow in front of you wants to know every single way he can ship his package to Istanbul? Or gotten some counter idiot at Burger King who can't comprehend Whopper No pickles. And the doctor says, yes, well, I suppose. He says, and how do you feel on those occasions? And the doctor says, impatient, irritated, a little angry sometimes. And Pietro responds with precisely, because your life is being slowed down to a crawl by the inabilities or inconvenience of behaviors of others. It's not a rational or considerate attitude to have, but there it is. And we know this as ADHD, that the annoyances we feel when we know we have ADHD aren't always rational, right? Especially if you have what I talked about with rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which goes hand in hand with some of this, right? And those combined aspects, that's exactly it. It's not irrational, you're aware of it, but you have it. And he goes on to say, now imagine, doctor, that everyone you work with, everywhere you go, your entire world is filled with people who can't work cash machines. I'd venture to say to the doctor that you too would suffer from this PMS, he calls it, but the anger. And he says, get the picture, it's not so puzzling now. And he, in the time it took him to say all that, he put together like a 5,000 piece puzzle of a snail, right? I thought that was really profound. It really connected with me on a lot of levels as a comic nerd and as a guy who couldn't understand the world. Because at that time, I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD. But when I looked back on it after I got my diagnosis, much after when I had my son, that I understood why that resonated so hard in those days. And I was like, there's those breadcrumbs that lead us here, right? So basic training is really the focus I got to get to keep this within the time, guys. And I will tell all the new people here, as was explained, I am not medicated currently. Having just retired from the military last year, I was given a certain amount of medication for my ADHD. I am taking Adderall, I believe, and that ran it. And because I moved to Ontario and Canada, I think why we're having a little bit of a doctor problem. It's taken me a long time to get a family doctor. We have just got one, but I'm not looking at getting my prescriptions refilled till January. So if you see me a little all over the place, it's another reason why I do these videos. You guys have learned it from my toy review on G.I. Joe Classified or my talk discussion shows on that stuff. I do it quite on purpose. I do one take to show you what I'm kind of going through, how easily distracted I can get, how the slightest bumble can throw everything out. If you're not diagnosed with ADHD and you're relating with me on these levels, this is why I'm doing the videos. So the Breakfast Club was a prime example of our social structure in the 80s and the 90s, right? And as much as a lot of us wanted to be Judd Nelson, somebody had to be the little nerd kid that was trying hard, and that was kind of me. But I was probably more successful than his character was in that I was accepted in high school. I wouldn't say I was bullied in high school. I wasn't. I was pretty accepted. I had a couple of enemies, like every boy seems to get at some point in their life. But as far as finding that balance and traversing those circles, I learned about it. Public school, I did have bullies. Public school, I learned about how to quiet myself down a little bit better socially, not with the teachers, but with my peers, so that I could fit in better. That was a very tumultuous time with a lot of social anxieties for a little kid to go through between the ages of, say, 13 and 16 by the time he found his jam, right? So eventually I became this guy, more confident in himself, more enabled, but that guy's 2007 Corporal Tourney at the time in Afghanistan, and he still hasn't been diagnosed with ADHD, and it was affecting him there, in combat, in real time. It blew my mind after when I got my diagnosis, just what I was looking at. By the way, squirrel, okay, I'm a hobbyist. You guys see it in the background. I don't just do toys. I like to paint models. I like to give things personalities. I prefer old and rustic over new and shiny. I'm that guy. Maybe I'm more like your dad than you. I don't know. Right? But these are the things I love doing with my hands. And without my medication right now, I find I can't even focus on doing that, which is problematic. I love meeting new people. I loved my time in the Army. I'll talk really poorly about certain aspects of my time in the Army, but don't ever think that, I didn't have a lot of good times. I did. And I love my friends dearly. That's my buddy Newt back home in Kingston. One of the closest friends I got in high school for sure. And has been he's been a brother ever since. And one of the few I have that aren't military, one of the very few I have that aren't military that are left. What a sad fact of being 50, right? This is how I view myself, and that's how you'll probably view me if you keep watching. There's me picking up some medals, and now you know all you needed to know. Except that I have a son, Emerson, and he is my whole world, and I love him dearly. And he's had some interests, and he's just done his best, but he also has ADHD. And we try to find some shared interests. A lot of field craft and stuff I was learning in the Army and know from the Army are things that interest him now. But because of him, I got my ADHD diagnosed. And you can see he's quite the supporter of military history and other interests like that. So Ryan, you hopped on a train and you went off to basic training to go get some discipline, you once said in a previous video. And now we're going to talk about what basic training was like. So this is where I went off to. I shipped off via rail. I said goodbye to my mom, and I said goodbye to my grandmother, who was dying of a brain tumor at the time in Kingston. And I hopped on that train and I took off to St. Jean, and I said, I'll see you guys after I graduate. I gotta go be something now. I was tired of being this flightless person with no potential. So I hopped on that train. I got to St. Jean, and the whole world fell apart from that moment forward, and I was doing my best to catch the pieces. But I did get one beautiful piece of advice that I always thank them for, from my aunt and uncle, who were Air Force service couple from the Canadian Armed Forces. They don't give me much advice, they never have, and it's fine, but they gave me advice when I needed it there, and they said, Ryan, no matter what they tell you when you get to basic training, it's all just a game. You have to figure out how to play. Not win, just play. And that's exactly what basic training was. The intent of basic training isn't to build a perfect soldier. It's to break down that civilian, right? As civilians, we would have this tendency to be very self-absorbed, and not in a malicious way, but that's just your world is within 6 feet of you, and it's your loved ones, and it's your career, and it's your hobbies and interests and your feelings and principles. But you think very much more about you and your family than you do about the rest of the community, more or less, and perhaps the city or the province or the state, or you get where I'm going, right? Broader stakes concerns aren't really inherent to you when you're not conditioned to think that way. And as a kid who already struggled with learning history, math, geography, and all these other things, I would say I went in ignorantly. My lack of threshold knowledge on certain things was prevalent. And I started off basic training being just as goofy as I did with high school and college. And that wasn't going to fly, right? You were getting screamed at to hurry up and then wait. You were screamed at to wait and then told to hurry up. Everything was running. Everything was moving fast. Sense of urgency. This building in St. Jean, Quebec, was called the Megaplex. It was a 11-story superstructure, and my entire course for basic training was placed on the 9th floor. And on day one, we were told we were not allowed to use the elevator. So every morning for breakfast, which was in the basement levels, you would have to run down those stairs and then get back up to get your stuff ready for inspection and other things that we were learning about the hard way. This wasn't the dark era of the military where they could hit you and do stuff like that. Hello, that's me, and I believe CJ Quinton, a friend of mine I'm still in touch with from odd time, but that's us in basic training at the time. You'll see some of those photos. Look how young that crusty old crow looks there with that beret on and those ears sticking out. The struggles I was having with ADHD at that time were getting hit on multiple fronts. With the inattentive side of me, things tend to pass my attention without me even recognizing them. And then with the hyper side of me, Sometimes I'll rush things and I won't pay attention to a small detail and things will go catastrophic. And I got very used to that. I found I had a very hard to work with pace when I had to work on a project. I really had to take my time. I'd even ask for more time on some projects just so I could do what other people were doing within that time frame. And the military wasn't going to have that in basic training. Now remember, I got accepted into the Army, not the Air Force and the Navy, although we all trained in basic training together in those 12 weeks at the time. We were all combined. And what we were being taught was how to not think like a civilian, but how to think almost like a hive mind. Worry about the buddy next to you, worry about what the team needs. We were slowly learning this mission, team, self way of thinking, right? And now it's ingrained in every soldier. We all think like that. I think after your first few years in the military, you start to have that perspective. If not, you leave the military usually. Mission, team, self, it asks a lot of you, right? And at the time, I was really struggling to get that bigger picture. I thought I could still maintain some level of my own individualism and still conform to the military way the way they were asking. And that wasn't necessarily true, but because my perception was so strange, I couldn't see how simple it really was as a matter of learn these new subjects and apply them. Learn code of ethics. Learn what a rank structure looks like. Learn a little bit of military history. Learn uniforms and what everything represents. Understand the branches of the military. They would sit us in this big dark classroom right after breakfast and turn up the heat and turn down the lights and want you to stay awake while you learn some of the driest stuff you've ever learned. For an ADHD mind, remember, I found history, English, science, biology, all those subjects dry and barely got seized. And now I'm learning all this other politically driven, supported by military structure and history subject knowledge and being demanded to stay awake. Not only that, I'm going to be tested on it. I was out of my element, but I studied hard because the one thing I was picking up at the time was that I could just pretend I get it and watch what these other guys are doing. It sounds like this cop-out strategy, but it was brilliant. By emulating exactly what the guys who did get it figured out were doing, it allowed me to see it from a different perspective. Why these boots had to be shined, why they had to be laced. It's about the attention to detail. That's why when the guy's looking at your boots, he's also pulling on a sheet because he's going to test whether you remember making your bed or not, because he knows you're tired. It was all these subtext things that I wasn't picking up on that my peers were understanding. And then I was understanding what my aunt and uncle said about it's a game. But there was other issues. You had to memorize the serial number from your rifle as well as your service number. My service number, I'm not going to recite it on YouTube, but it was a letter followed by a series of digits, and you had to recite that. It was longer than your social insurance number at the time. And then memorizing your rifle number, full serial number. For those of you who've handled weapons before, those are substantive numbers. And, I always joke, I lost my phone number after that. And then I lost, I kept pushing shit out of my head to learn all this new stuff. But ask a guy whose attention to detail is inflicted by the fact that he can barely pay attention to what he's doing in a moment, right? Like constant forgetfulness, short-term memory, things like that. Very affected with the hyperactive disorder side of ADHD. You're sleeping 4 hours a night. You're bag driven. You're doing PT all day, classroom all night, more class, all through. And then they tell you to put your rifles away and work on this, do this, take you here, go get your rifles. And you've forgotten which locker of your group lockups you put your rifle in. Moreover, you can't remember 4 of the digits on your number, right? And this is where I got introduced to group punishment. This hit me hard with the RSD, especially. So, like I said, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, guys, I learned about recently. It is kind of this theoretical description of a possible, like a way of thinking within ADHD, and it's kind of being separated as its own thing because it's basically taking things very personally, even things that aren't said. It's body language, it's subtext, it's action, it's why did that action occur, and you're filling in a blank because you're not being communicated with about it, right? So that was where mine was kicking in. But you want to see that aggravated, talk about group punishment in the military. For one soldier losing his weapon, 20 soldiers have to run down 30 soldiers have to run down 90 sets of stairs at 11 o'clock at night, get formed up and screamed at by the duty sergeant of the night, who damn well knows where the rifle is and that it's not lost, but he wants to sort you guys out and he's going to have a little fun with it. And so they subject you to push-ups, wall planks, and all this other corporal punishment, they call it. It's physical conditioning. My God, we could all use it, I'm sure, at the time. But this was not something we keep doing. The punishment wasn't suiting the crime, and we learned about that as a training system over years, right? But this was the stuff. Everybody on that course had to come down and take the brunt of what I had done by forgetting 4 digits of my service, my rifle's number, and putting it in the wrong locker. We found the rifle. There was nothing, but my peers didn't look at me the same after that, and a lot of things weren't the same after that, but we were close to grad, and so be it. I was getting through. Hi, Kat. Yeah, he's curious about ADHD. He has it. So where else was the struggle in basic training? Okay, well, a lot of it was the social stuff for sure. It was trying to find out where you kind of fit in with your group, because sometimes you would get tasked with something called a course senior. That is your one little cadet getting a little bit of responsibility above the rest of the course, and that he's accountable for them. And if the course senior failed, the course failed the course senior, and the course gets jacked again. And when I got the course senior, I remember it was a lot of stress for me, because I was so concerned already with making sure that things were going smoothly, that my obstacles were few, and that I was fitting in, and that I wasn't going to be defeated. I had just started. And when I left the bar I was working at to go join the Army, I remembered clearly my manager, Chris, said to me, "You won't make it 2 weeks." And there's that RSD right there. There it is. What the fuck did you just say to me? I will make it more than 2 weeks. I'm going to go do a full goddamn career, right? I did it to prove a point. And I think a lot of the times when things got hard, I kept going back to that statement, because when you are possibly with RSD, but with ADHD and these different perceptions and these ways to interpret people's intentions, right, or information that you're being given that you aren't understanding, it's easy to ruminate and grudge. We grudge hard. We do. And we don't always understand the simplest thing right in front of us. Somebody could be wishing us luck, and we could be hearing it and going, you want me to fail, right? Guys, so basic training, it was one of these wake-up calls, a lot of information, this entire civilian way of being broken down and thinking on the military way. And then you graduate after 12 weeks, and you're going to move on to your respective trade training. So Navy people will go off to further naval training, supply techs, all these other trades go off, and then us Army guys are going to go off to our respective battle schools. You had an infantry battle school, you had an armored battle school, an engineer one, and an artillery one. I was on my way to the armored one to go learn about armored recce stuff, and become a Royal Canadian Dragoon at some point, and go off to Petawawa and join a regimental family. I was very excited about that. I really was. I was going to belong to something, but the warning signs were there. Upon graduation, I was still very at odds with a couple of people. I was realizing this was the first time I had met an actual Newfoundlander in my own country. I had never met one. First time I had worked with not one but 2 African Americans, and where I grew up in my hometown, it was white bread, people. It was all white bread in the 80s and 90s. It really was. You had very little ethnic diversity going on. You maybe knew one Chinese kid and one maybe Pakistani kid. Maybe you knew a First Nations kid. But that was it. So it was an eye-opening experience. I was choking down a lot of information. The problem was they at graduation were supposed to have broken down that civilian thinking. There's just some more pictures for that. And in hindsight with me, they hadn't yet. I maybe shouldn't have finished basic at that point. My mental perspective wasn't right. I was still not perceiving something the right way, and there was evidence of it, but nobody could really put their finger on it, and I graduated. I wasn't bottom third, I was in the middle. I was fine, but there was a smell in the air that something was still wrong, and I wasn't going to fit in. I could feel it. And I would see evidence of that later in battle school, and then once I got to my regiment. Did I have good times in basic training? Of course I did. Don't these look like I'm having the time of my life? Oops, no, right there. I'm having the time of my life, guys. Where I did fit in, who I fit in with, it worked, right? But I wasn't seeing these obstacles. I see them now, and I'm just trying to say, hey, me, when you, especially to you soldiers still serving, when you have a troop that's really struggling, be insightful. Start looking at it. Yeah, it could just be discipline. You could be dealing with a full-on bag of crap on your hands that has nothing going on with him but his own self-interest. That's entirely possible. It's very likely. But there could also be something going on with that guy that he doesn't understand, and there's mental health services all over the place that you could help somebody with by referring them to him. The hardest part of being an adult with and getting diagnosed with severe ADHD, guys, is the amount of shame and guilt you start looking back at your life with and screaming that it could have been prevented. I went through an entire point where I was like, oh my God, if I had known about this, if somebody had enabled me and known about this ADHD and how the education system wasn't working for me, I needed a different approach to learn this stuff. Because I said in my last video, I learned that I was dumb. I later learned in life that's not at all the case. I'm not dumb. I'm actually probably smarter than I ever give myself credit for. But at that time, you look back now and go, what was I prevented from trying? Maybe I wanted to try medicine. I wanted to help people. That's why I joined the Army. Maybe I wanted to be a medic. Maybe I wanted to be a doctor, and they ruled it out. And I believed it because I thought I was dumb. But really, nobody had the right way to teach it. As we go on in this series, guys, because I'm summing it up here at 30 some odd minutes, I'm going to get into battle school next in the regiment, like I said, but I didn't get to go right to the next level of training. I had something very unique happen to my course when we graduated in that winter of 97 going into 98. I should have just hopped on a bus and gone to battle school, but we went home for Christmas and did all that, and then we were going to go to battle school that January. Until I woke up to Ice Storm 98, which hit Southern Ontario really bad, caused a kind of a crisis. So I went on my first domestic deployment operation as an untrained private. And you want to see where a guy learns how irrelevant he is. That's it there, and I'll cover that at another time too, guys. Really quickly, one of the things I really did like was this saying. It was something I always liked. I painted this for our garden in our last house, and it was just about travel and why I went with spinning compass. It was destination is so much more important. What is it? Oh, sorry. It's not like I have it memorized now that I'm recording. I did before. What did it say? Direction is so much more important than speed, guys. I got where I wanted to go. I didn't go as far as I wanted to go. ADHD definitely had put some obstacles I was never aware of. But I'm where I want to be. I'm self-aware, and I'm doing something about it. And I hope that this all slowly catches on with you guys, and you guys have an interest in this. And if you did, please hit that like. Please subscribe. Please share this with anybody you think might benefit from hearing about a person who's been through the ADHD and has a perspective like the crows. Press the old crow. And until episode 2, I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks very much. Bye.